The mud tasted like death and broken promises as it filled her mouth, her body jerking violently behind the galloping horse that dragged her through the Arizona desert, like she was nothing more than a sack of grain. 23-year-old Catherine Morrison had made the mistake of witnessing something she should not have seen, and now Jack Harlow, the most feared man in Tombstone, had tied her wrists with thick rope and fastened the other end to his saddle, determined to silence her permanently. The year was 1882, and in this lawless territory a woman's life meant little when it stood between a man and his secrets. Catherine's dress had torn away in strips, leaving her arms and legs scraped raw against the rocky ground. She could barely breathe between the choking dust and the relentless pounding of her body against the earth. Every rock felt like a hammer blow. Every rut in the trail threatened to snap her bones. She had stopped screaming after the first mile, her voice shredded and useless, her strength nearly gone. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she wondered if she would die from the dragging or from the heat first. Through the haze of pain and terror, she heard the crack of a rifle shot, then another. The horse stumbled, whinnied in confusion, and suddenly the terrible motion stopped. Catherine lay gasping in the mud, her vision swimming, barely able to process what was happening. She heard men shouting, the sound of boots hitting the ground, and then Jack Harlow's voice, high and angry. "This is none of your concern, stranger. The woman's a thief. That right?" The voice that answered was deep and steady, with a Texas drawl that somehow cut through Catherine's fog of pain. "Because from where I was sitting, it looked like you were murdering her in cold blood." Catherine forced her eyes open, squinting against the bright sky. Two figures stood silhouetted against the sun. One was Jack Harlow, his hand hovering near his pistol. The other was a tall man in a dusty black hat, his stance relaxed but ready, a Winchester rifle held loosely in his hands. "I said it's none of your business," Harlow repeated, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Ride on, cowboy, before you get yourself killed over something that does not matter." "I think I will stay right here." The stranger's voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath it. "I think you should step away from the lady." "She ain't no lady. She's a lying, thieving—" "Step away," the stranger interrupted, and this time the rifle came up just an inch, just enough to make his point clear. Catherine watched through blurred vision as Jack Harlow's face twisted with rage and calculation. His hand moved toward his gun, and time seemed to slow. The stranger's rifle barked once, the sound sharp and final in the desert air. Jack Harlow staggered backward, a red stain blooming across his chest, his eyes wide with surprise. He fell to his knees, then forward into the dust, and did not move again. The stranger was beside Catherine in seconds, his knife already out. She flinched instinctively, but his hands were gentle as he cut through the rope binding her wrists. "Easy now," he said softly. "You are safe. I have got you." Catherine tried to speak, but only a croak came out. Her throat was raw from screaming and dust. She tried to sit up and gasped as pain shot through her entire body. "Do not move too fast," the stranger cautioned. His face came into focus now, lean and weathered, with dark eyes that held genuine concern. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with several days' worth of stubble on his jaw and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years under the open sky. "Let me get you some water." He moved to his horse, a sturdy roan mare that stood calmly nearby, and returned with a canteen. He supported Catherine's head with one hand while holding the canteen to her lips with the other. The water was warm but tasted like salvation. She drank greedily, coughed, then drank more slowly. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "What is your name?" he asked, his dark eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her heart skip despite her battered condition. "Catherine. Catherine Morrison." "James Thornton," he replied. "Can you tell me what happened here, Miss Morrison?" Catherine's mind raced back to that morning, to what she had seen behind the Silver Dollar Saloon. Jack Harlow and two of his men standing over the body of Sheriff Coleman, dividing up a leather satchel full of money. She had been taking a shortcut back to the boarding house where she worked, and she had frozen when she saw them, but not quickly enough. Harlow had spotted her, and she had run. She had made it 3 blocks before he caught her. "I saw him kill Sheriff Coleman," she whispered. "This morning, behind the saloon. He and his men shot him and took the money from the land office robbery last week. Everyone thought it was the Apache, but it was Harlow all along. He saw me watching, and he chased me down." James's jaw tightened. "Coleman was a good man. He hired me 2 days ago to scout for the men who robbed that land office." He looked over at Harlow's body, his expression grim. "Seems like I found them." "There were 2 others with him," Catherine said urgently, trying again to sit up. "They might come looking." "Then we need to get you out of here," James said decisively. He studied her for a moment, clearly assessing her injuries. "Can you ride?" "I think so." Catherine was not sure, but she knew she could not stay here. With James's help, she managed to get to her feet, swaying dangerously. Her dress was ruined, hanging in tatters, and she was covered in mud and blood. Every inch of her body screamed in protest, but she set her jaw and forced herself to stay upright. James shrugged out of his duster coat and draped it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled of leather, tobacco, and sage. "I have a camp about 2 miles from here, up in the rocks where there is shade and water. We will go there, get you cleaned up, and then figure out what to do next." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist, steady and secure, and Catherine found herself leaning back against his chest, too exhausted and hurt to maintain any pretense of propriety. As they rode away from that terrible place, she allowed herself one glance back at Jack Harlow's body lying in the dust. She felt no remorse, only a profound relief that he could not hurt her anymore. The 2 miles felt like 20, but finally they reached a small canyon where a spring bubbled up between the rocks, creating a small oasis of green in the harsh landscape. James had made his camp here, a simple bedroll and fire ring, with his supplies neatly organized under a canvas tarp. He helped Catherine down from the horse and settled her on a flat rock near the spring. "Let me tend to your injuries," he said, already moving to gather supplies. He brought out a clean shirt from his saddlebag, tore it into strips, and soaked them in the cool spring water. "This is going to hurt," he warned. Catherine nodded, bracing herself. When the wet cloth touched the raw abrasions on her arms, she hissed in pain but did not pull away. James worked methodically, cleaning the dirt and debris from her wounds with a gentle touch that surprised her. His hands were calloused from years of hard work, but they moved with surprising care. "You have done this before," she observed, her voice still rough. "I rode with the Texas Rangers for 3 years, James explained, not looking up from his work. "Saw plenty of injuries, learned how to patch them up. After that, I spent time working cattle drives. You learn to be your own doctor out there." "What brought you to Arizona?" "Looking for a change, I suppose. The ranger life wore on me after a while. Too much killing, too much seeing the worst in people." He moved to her other arm, his touch just as gentle. "I wanted to find some place where I could make a difference without a gun, but it seems like trouble finds me anyway." "I'm glad it did," Catherine said softly. "Today, I mean. I'm glad you were there." James met her eyes then, and something passed between them, a connection that made Catherine's breath catch. "So am I," he said quietly. As the afternoon wore into evening, James built a fire and made a simple meal of beans and hardtack. Catherine had managed to wash most of the mud from her face and hands, though she knew she must look a fright. James had given her a spare shirt to wear, which hung on her like a dress, and she had done her best to make herself decent. "Tell me about yourself," James said as they ate, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "What is a woman like you doing in Tombstone?" Catherine wrapped her hands around the tin cup of coffee he had given her, savoring the warmth. I came here 6 months ago from Missouri. My parents died of fever last year, and there was nothing left for me there. A friend had written about opportunities in the territory, so I took what little money I had and bought a ticket west. She smiled ruefully. The reality was somewhat different from what I had imagined. It usually is, James said with understanding. The West has a way of being both better and worse than you expect. I found work at a boarding house, cooking and cleaning. Mrs. Henderson, the owner, she's a kind woman. It is honest work, and I have a room and 3 meals a day. Catherine stared into the fire. Or I did, until this morning. I do not know if I can go back now. Harlow's men will be looking for me. You cannot go back, James agreed. Not yet, anyway. Not until we figure out who else was involved and make sure they face justice. Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling desert air. What do you mean? I mean that Sheriff Coleman is dead and the only witness is you. I mean that Harlow was not working alone, and his partners are going to want to tie up loose ends. James leaned forward, his expression serious. I mean that you are in danger, Miss Morrison, and I am not going to let anything happen to you. The certainty in his voice made Catherine's heart race. You do not even know me. I know enough, James said firmly. I know you are brave enough to testify against a killer. I know you survived being dragged behind a horse, which means you are tougher than you look. And I know that letting you face this alone would make me no better than the men who hurt you. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since the ordeal began. I do not understand why you are helping me. James was quiet for a long moment, studying her across the fire. My sister, he finally said, his voice rough with old pain. 5 years ago, she was attacked by a man in Dallas. No one helped her. No one wanted to get involved. She survived, but she was never the same. She moved back east to live with our aunt, and I have barely heard from her since. He met Catherine's eyes. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone to stop something like that from happening, I would not hesitate. I would not look away. I am sorry about your sister, Catherine said softly. Me too. James poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. But maybe I can make it mean something by being here for you now. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a coyote. Catherine found herself studying James when she thought he was not looking, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the way the firelight caught in his dark hair, the capable strength in his hands. She had known him for only hours, yet she felt safer with him than she had in months. We should get some rest, James said eventually. Tomorrow we need to ride into Tucson. There is a federal marshal there, a man named Garrett, who I know from my ranger days. He will know what to do about this mess. Tucson is 3 days' ride, Catherine protested. 2 if we push it, James countered. And it is the closest place where we can find law that is not corrupted by Harlow's influence. Half the deputies in Tombstone were on his payroll. Catherine had not known that, but it did not surprise her. She nodded reluctantly. What about tonight? You take my bedroll. I will keep watch. You need to sleep too. I will be fine, James assured her. I've gone longer without sleep before. Besides, I will not rest easy until I know we are not being followed. Catherine wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide. Every muscle in her body ached, and her eyelids felt heavy as stones. James helped her to the bedroll and covered her with a blanket. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the sight of him sitting by the fire, his rifle across his knees, keeping watch through the night. She woke once in the darkness, confused and frightened, the memory of being dragged behind the horse flooding back. She must have cried out because suddenly James was there, kneeling beside her. You are safe, he murmured, his hand gentle on her shoulder. Just a bad dream. I am right here. Catherine reached out instinctively, and James took her hand, his grip warm and solid. Stay, she whispered. Please. James hesitated, then nodded. He sat beside the bedroll, his back against a rock, still holding her hand. With his presence anchoring her, Catherine drifted back to sleep, and this time the nightmares did not return. Dawn came with brilliant colors spreading across the eastern sky, turning the desert from black to gold. Catherine woke to find James already up, breaking camp and preparing for the journey. He had let her sleep as long as possible, she realized, and she felt a rush of gratitude mixed with something deeper and more complicated. How are you feeling? He asked when he saw her stirring. Like I was dragged behind a horse, Catherine said wryly, then was surprised when James laughed. It was a good sound, warm and genuine, and it made her smile despite everything. Fair enough, he said. Think you can manage to ride today? Catherine took stock of her body. Everything hurt, but it was a dull ache rather than the sharp agony of yesterday. I can manage. They shared a quick breakfast of jerky and the last of the hardtack, then mounted up. This time Catherine was more aware of James behind her, of the solid warmth of his chest against her back, of his arm around her waist. She found herself noticing details she had missed in her pain-hazed state the day before. The scent of him. Clean sweat and leather and something indefinably masculine. The steady rhythm of his breathing. The way his hand rested protectively on her hip. They rode through the morning, following trails that James seemed to know by instinct. He kept them off the main roads, sticking to dry washes and rocky terrain where their tracks would be harder to follow. They passed stands of saguaro cactus standing like sentinels in the desert, and once they startled a small herd of pronghorn that bounded away across the scrubland. By midday the heat was oppressive. James called a halt at a cluster of rocks that provided some shade, and they shared water from his canteen. Catherine was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, their shoulders almost touching. Tell me about Missouri, James said, breaking the silence. What was it like growing up there? Catherine smiled at the memory. Green. So much greener than here. We had a farm outside of Independence, corn and wheat mostly. My father also bred horses, beautiful animals with good bloodlines. We were not rich, but we were comfortable. Her smile faded. The fever took them within days of each other. My father first, then my mother. I think she did not really want to live without him. That is a rare kind of love, James observed. Is it? Catherine looked at him curiously. Have you never been in love? James was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. I thought I was once. A girl named Sarah back in Texas. But when the ranger work got dangerous and I was gone more than I was home, she decided she wanted a husband who would be around to grow old with. She married a banker. He shrugged. I cannot say I blame her. Do you regret it? Choosing the Rangers over her? No, James said without hesitation. If she had been the right woman, she would have understood. She would have waited or come with me or found a way to make it work. The fact that she did not tells me it was not meant to be. What kind of woman would be right for you? Catherine asked, surprising herself with her boldness. James turned to look at her then, his dark eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Someone strong, he said slowly, someone who's not afraid of hardship, someone brave enough to build a life in a hard land. He paused. Someone like you, maybe. The words hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Catherine felt her heart hammering in her chest. She knew she should look away, should say something to break the tension, but she could not seem to move. James, she began, not sure what she was going to say. He leaned forward, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Tell me to stop, he said quietly. Tell me this is not what you want, and I will never mention it again. Catherine could not tell him that. The truth was that she wanted this, wanted him, with an intensity that should have frightened her. Instead of speaking, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Then James's arm came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened. Catherine felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, her entire world narrowing to the feel of his lips on hers, his hand tangled in her hair, the solid strength of him against her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "Catherine," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. "I know this is crazy," Catherine whispered. "We have known each other for barely a day." "Sometimes that is all it takes," James said. "My parents met on a Monday and were married by Saturday. They had 40 good years together before my father passed. When you know, you know." "And do you know?" James pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "I know that I would ride through hell for you. I know that when I look at you, I see a future I never let myself imagine before. I know that you are the bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Is that enough?" "Yes," Catherine breathed, and kissed him again. They stayed in that shaded spot longer than they should have, stealing kisses and talking about everything and nothing. James told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the vast open spaces that had shaped him. Catherine told him about her dreams of the West, about wanting a life bigger than what she had known in Missouri, about the books she had read as a girl that had filled her head with visions of adventure. "I never imagined the adventure would involve being dragged behind a horse," she said with dark humor. "The best adventures usually involve some danger," James replied, then grew serious. "But I promise you, Catherine, I will not let anyone hurt you again." "I know," Catherine said simply, and she did know. She trusted this man with a certainty that defied logic, trusted him with her life and, increasingly, with her heart. They rode on through the afternoon, making good time despite the heat. As evening approached, they came to a small settlement, barely more than a way station with a few adobe buildings. James was cautious, scouting ahead before bringing Catherine in. The proprietor, an older Mexican man named Santos, agreed to give them a room for the night and asked no questions about the bedraggled woman in the oversized shirt. The room was simple but clean, with a real bed and a wash basin. Catherine felt like she had entered paradise. There was even a copper tub, and Santos's wife brought buckets of heated water so Catherine could bathe. James waited outside, giving her privacy, and Catherine luxuriated in the simple pleasure of being clean. When she emerged, dressed in a simple dress that Santos's wife had kindly provided, she found James sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. He stood when he saw her, his eyes widening. "You look beautiful," he said softly. Catherine felt herself blush. "It is just a plain dress." "It is not the dress," James said, and the look in his eyes made her heart race. They ate dinner in the small cantina attached to the way station. Simple but delicious food that tasted like a feast after days of trail rations. Santos and his wife were kind, asking no questions but clearly assuming that Catherine and James were married. Neither of them corrected the assumption. When they returned to their room, Catherine felt suddenly nervous. There was only one bed, and while nothing had been said, the air was thick with unspoken possibilities. "I can sleep on the floor," James offered, reading her hesitation. "No," Catherine said quickly. She took a breath, steadying herself. "I do not want you on the floor. I want you to stay with me." "Catherine, I will not take advantage." "You would not be," Catherine interrupted. She crossed the room to stand in front of him, looking up into his eyes. "James, I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other, but I also know that I have never felt this way about anyone. When I thought I was going to die yesterday, dragged through that mud, my only regret was that I would never have a chance to really live, to love someone and be loved in return." She reached up to touch his face. "You saved my life, and now I want to live it with you." James caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." What followed was tender and passionate, a joining that felt inevitable and right. James was gentle with her injuries, mindful of her bruises, and Catherine felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. They explored each other with wonder and growing confidence, and when they finally came together, it felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Catherine's head on James's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Marry me," James said into the darkness. Catherine lifted her head to look at him. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "I know it is fast, I know it is crazy, but I meant what I said earlier. When you know, you know. I want to spend my life with you, Catherine. I want to build a ranch somewhere, raise horses and children, and grow old watching the sunset. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. Marry me." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." James kissed her then, deep and thorough, and they made love again, slower this time, savoring every touch and taste. They were up before dawn, eager to reach Tucson and settle the matter of Jack Harlow once and for all. The ride took another day and a half, pushing hard but stopping when Catherine needed rest. James was attentive to her comfort, making sure she ate and drank enough, checking her injuries regularly. The scrapes and bruises were healing, but they would leave scars, physical reminders of the ordeal she had survived. Tucson was larger than Catherine had expected. A bustling town with adobe buildings and dusty streets filled with wagons and horses. James led them straight to the marshal's office, a solid building near the center of town. Marshal Thomas Garrett was a big man in his 50s with iron gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He listened intently as James explained what had happened, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Coleman was a friend," Garrett said heavily when James finished, "a good lawman and a better man. If what Miss Morrison says is true, and I have no reason to doubt her, then Harlow's partners need to face justice." "Can you help us?" Catherine asked. "I can and I will," Garrett assured her. "I will send deputies to Tombstone to round up the rest of Harlow's gang. Miss Morrison, I will need you to give a formal statement and be willing to testify when this goes to trial." "I will," Catherine said firmly. "Sheriff Coleman deserves justice." "There is something else," James said, and Catherine heard a new note in his voice. "Marshal, Miss Morrison and I would like to be married as soon as possible." Garrett's eyebrows rose, and a smile tugged at his mouth. "That's so? Well, I will be damned. You work fast, Thornton." "When you know, you know," James said, echoing what he had told Catherine. "I suppose you do," Garrett agreed. He stood and reached for his hat. "As it happens, I am authorized to perform marriages in the territory. If you are both sure about this, we can do it today." Catherine and James looked at each other, and she saw her own certainty reflected in his eyes. "Today," she confirmed. The ceremony was simple, held in the marshal's office with Garrett's secretary and a deputy as witnesses. Catherine wore the borrowed dress from the way station, and James had cleaned up as best he could, his dark hair still damp from washing. When Garrett asked if they took each other as husband and wife, they answered in unison, their voices strong and sure. "Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife," Garrett declared. "Thornton, you may kiss your bride." James cupped Catherine's face in his hands and kissed her thoroughly, and Catherine felt joy bubble up inside her like a spring. When they broke apart, she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Congratulations," Garrett said warmly, shaking James's hand, and then kissing Catherine's cheek in a fatherly manner. "Now let us talk about what happens next." What happened next was that Catherine gave her statement, detailing everything she had seen that terrible morning. Garrett sent a telegram to the territorial governor and assembled a group of trusted deputies to ride to Tombstone. James insisted on going with them, but Garrett refused. "You are a civilian now, Thornton," the marshal reminded him. "And besides, you have a wife to think about. Stay here. Let us handle this. I will send word when it is done." James was not happy, but he accepted it. He and Catherine took a room at a boarding house in Tucson, a clean, comfortable place run by a widow named Mrs. O'Brien. She was delighted to hear they were newlyweds and gave them her best room, complete with lace curtains and a quilt she had made herself. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Catherine and James were happy, exploring their new marriage with the enthusiasm of young people in love, but they were also waiting for news from Tombstone, wondering if Harlow's partners would be brought to justice. They spent their days walking around Tucson, making plans for their future. James found work temporarily with a local rancher who needed help with his horses, and Catherine marveled at watching her husband work. He had a natural way with animals, patient and firm, and the horses responded to him beautifully. "My father would have liked you," she told him one evening as they walked back to the boarding house, her hand tucked into his arm. "I wish I could have met him," James replied. "I would have liked to ask his permission properly." "He would have given it," Catherine said with certainty. "He always said the measure of a man was in his actions, not his words. You saved my life, James. You gave me a future when I thought I had none. He would have approved." A week after they arrived in Tucson, Marshal Garrett returned with good news. Harlow's 2 partners had been arrested, along with 3 corrupt deputies. The stolen money had been recovered, and the territorial governor had personally thanked Catherine for her bravery in coming forward. "You can go anywhere you want now," Garrett told them over dinner at the boarding house. "Harlow's gang is finished. You are free to build your life." "We have been talking about that," James said, his hand finding Catherine's under the table. "There is land available north of here near Prescott. Good grazing land, plenty of water. I was thinking we could start a horse ranch." "Prescott is beautiful country," Garrett agreed. "You would do well there." Catherine felt excitement flutter in her chest. "We could really do it, start over fresh?" "We can do anything we want," James assured her. "We can build the life we want together." And that was exactly what they did. Within a month, they had purchased land outside of Prescott, a beautiful valley with a creek running through it and views of the distant mountains. With hard work and determination, they built a cabin starting small, but with plans to expand. James proved to be as skilled at construction as he was with horses, and Catherine learned quickly, working alongside him even when her hands blistered and her back ached. Their first year of marriage was not easy. They faced challenges that would have broken a weaker couple. A harsh winter that killed several of their first horses, a drought that dried up part of their creek, and the constant hard work of building a ranch from nothing. But they faced each challenge together, and their love grew stronger with each obstacle they overcame. Catherine discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1883, and the joy on James's face when she told him made her heart swell. He became even more protective, insisting she rest more, worrying about her constantly. Catherine found it both touching and slightly exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know," James said, pulling her into his arms. "But you are precious to me, Catherine. You and this baby are my whole world. I cannot help worrying." "Then worry less and help me hang this laundry," Catherine said with a smile, and James laughed and did as she asked. Their son was born in November, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's determined chin. They named him Thomas Coleman Thornton, after the marshal who had helped them and the sheriff who had been murdered. As Catherine held her newborn son, with James sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked quietly. "The day you found me?" "Every day," James admitted. "I think about how close I came to not riding that way. I almost took the northern trail that morning. If I had, I never would have found you." "Fate," Catherine said softly, "or luck, or providence, whatever you want to call it, I am grateful for it." James kissed the top of her head. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine Thornton. And you to me." Little Thomas proved to be a happy, healthy baby, and Catherine took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. The ranch continued to grow, and James's reputation as a horse breeder spread throughout the territory. By their 3rd anniversary, they had a thriving business and a comfortable home, with additions built onto the original cabin. In 1885, Catherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace. She had her mother's fair hair and her father's steady temperament. Thomas, now a rambunctious toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. Life settled into a rhythm, the hard work of the ranch balanced by the joys of family. Catherine and James hired a young couple to help with the work, allowing them more time with their children. They made friends in Prescott, became part of the community, and built a life richer than either had imagined. On a warm evening in the summer of 1886, Catherine and James sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Thomas and Grace were asleep inside, tired out from a day of playing. James's arm was around Catherine's shoulders, and she was tucked against his side, content and peaceful. "Do you remember when you proposed to me?" Catherine asked, "in that little room at the way station?" "I remember everything about that night," James said, his voice warm with memory. "You said you wanted to grow old watching the sunset with me." "I did say that." "Well, we are doing it," Catherine said, gesturing at the spectacular display of colors painting the sky. "Every night together." James turned to look at her, his eyes full of love. "And I plan to keep doing it for the next 50 years. "Only 50? Catherine teased. "However long we have," James amended. "Every day with you is a gift, Catherine. From that first moment when I cut you free, you have been the center of my world." Catherine kissed him slow and sweet, tasting 4 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. When she pulled back, she smiled. "I love you, James Thornton. And I love you, Catherine Thornton. Today, tomorrow, and always." The years continued to pass, each one adding to the tapestry of their life together. In 1888, Catherine gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Daniel, who kept the entire household on their toes with their energy and mischief. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved working with the horses, while Grace was bright and curious, constantly asking questions about everything. The ranch prospered beyond their early hopes. James's horses were sought after throughout Arizona and New Mexico, prized for their intelligence and stamina. Catherine managed the business side of the operation, her sharp mind for numbers and natural head for negotiation, making her an invaluable partner. They hired more help as the ranch grew, providing employment for families in the area and becoming known as fair and generous employers. Marshall Garrett visited occasionally, always welcomed as the friend he had become. He delighted in watching their family grow, often bringing small gifts for the children. On one visit in 1890, he and James sat on the porch while Catherine supervised the children's dinner inside. "You have done well for yourself, Thornton," Garrett observed, gesturing at the thriving ranch. "This is a good life you have built." "The best life," James agreed. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I was that day." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Garrett said firmly. "You saw someone in trouble and you helped. Consequences be damned. That takes courage and character. You earned this happiness." "Maybe," James allowed, "but I would have nothing without Catherine. She is the strongest person I know." Inside, Catherine was wiping jam off Daniel's face while trying to keep Samuel from feeding his vegetables to the dog. She caught James looking at her through the window and smiled, that special smile that was just for him. And James felt his heart swell with love, just as it had that first day. In 1892, Catherine and James celebrated their 10th anniversary. By this time, their ranch was one of the most successful in the territory. They had built a proper ranch house, large and comfortable, with room for their growing family and the occasional guest. The original cabin still stood, though, preserved as a reminder of where they had started. For their anniversary, James surprised Catherine with a week away, just the two of them. They left the children in the capable hands of their foreman's wife and rode to Flagstaff, where they stayed in a fine hotel and pretended just for a little while to be young and carefree again. On their last night, they stood on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out at the star-filled sky. Catherine leaned back against James's chest, his arms wrapped around her. "Are you happy?" James asked, his lips close to her ear. Happier than I ever thought possible, Catherine replied honestly. When I think about where I was 10 years ago, what I was facing, it feels like a different life. You never talk about it much. That day, I mean. Catherine was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. For a long time, I had nightmares about it, the mud, the pain, the certainty that I was going to die. But over the years, those memories have faded. Now, when I think about that day, I mostly remember the moment you cut me free, the moment you gave me my life back. She turned in his arms to face him. You are my hero, James Thornton. You always will be. You saved yourself, James countered gently. You survived because you are strong and brave. I just helped along the way. Then we saved each other, Catherine compromised, and kissed him under the stars. The years of the 1890s brought changes to Arizona and to their family. The territory was becoming more civilized, with more towns springing up and railroads connecting distant places. Thomas grew into a young man, tall and capable like his father, with plans to expand the ranch's breeding program. Grace developed a love of learning and talked about becoming a teacher. The twins were still young but already showing distinct personalities, Samuel thoughtful and artistic, Daniel bold and adventurous. In 1897, Catherine and James welcomed their sixth and final child, a daughter they named Hope. Catherine was 38 by then, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, but when she held her baby girl, she knew Hope was meant to be part of their family. James was a devoted father, somehow managing to give each child individual attention despite the demands of the ranch. He taught Thomas everything he knew about horses and ranching. He read to Grace every night, even when he was exhausted from a long day's work. He patiently answered the twins' endless questions and rocked baby Hope to sleep when Catherine needed rest. One evening, when Hope was about 2 years old, the entire family gathered on the porch after dinner. It had become a tradition, this time together at the end of the day, watching the sun set and simply being together. Thomas was teaching Samuel how to whittle, while Daniel peppered his older brother with questions. Grace was reading to Hope, showing her the pictures in a storybook. Catherine sat beside James on the porch swing he had built years ago, their hands linked, watching their children. "We did good," she said softly. "We did," James agreed. "Better than good. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if that day had never happened? If you had taken the northern trail and never found me?" James considered this. Sometimes. But then I think that maybe somehow we would have found each other anyway. Some things are meant to be. "I like to think so," Catherine said. She rested her head on his shoulder, content. "I like to think that no matter what, we would have ended up right here." As the children grew older and the 20th century dawned, the ranch continued to thrive. Thomas took over more of the day-to-day operations, allowing James and Catherine to step back slightly, though neither could imagine fully retiring. They had poured too much of themselves into this land, this life. In 1903, Thomas married a wonderful young woman named Sarah, and the following year they gave Catherine and James their first grandchild, a boy named after his grandfather. Catherine cried when she held little James for the first time, overwhelmed with joy and the passage of time. Grace did indeed become a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property that served the children of their employees and neighboring families. The twins both stayed on the ranch, Samuel focusing on breeding and training while Daniel handled sales and transport. Hope, youngest and perhaps most beloved, was the light of the family, bringing joy wherever she went. On their 25th anniversary in 1907, Catherine and James renewed their vows in a ceremony attended by their entire extended family and half the town of Prescott. At 48, Catherine was still beautiful, her fair hair now streaked with silver, her face lined but radiant. James, at 50, was distinguished and handsome, his dark hair gone mostly gray, his body still strong from years of physical work. Marshall Garrett, now retired and living in Phoenix, made the trip to attend. He stood beside James as they had stood all those years ago in Tucson, and when the ceremony was over, the old marshal embraced them both. I have married a lot of people in my time, Garrett said, his voice thick with emotion. But I never married a couple I was more certain would last than you two. You have proven me right. We owe you so much, Catherine told him. If you had not helped us that day— You owe me nothing, Garrett interrupted firmly. You two built this life with your own hands and your own hearts. I am just grateful I got to witness it. The celebration lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and food aplenty. Catherine danced with James as the sun set, the same sun they had watched together for 25 years, and thought about the long, unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. From terror and pain to joy and love, from strangers to partners to soulmates. What are you thinking? James asked, reading the expression on her face. I am thinking about that mud, Catherine said honestly, about how I was certain I was dying and how all I wanted was a chance to live. And look at what I got. Look at this life we built. You deserved every bit of it, James said fiercely. You deserved happiness and love and all of this. So did you. Catherine pulled back to look up at him. You could have ridden past that day. Most men would have. But you stopped, and you helped, and you changed everything. Best decision I ever made, James said simply, and kissed her as their children and grandchildren and friends cheered around them. The years continued their steady march. Catherine and James aged gracefully, growing older together as they had always planned. They became pillars of the community, respected and loved. The ranch remained successful, now run primarily by their children, but still bearing the mark of its founders. In 1915, as the world beyond Arizona was convulsed by war, Catherine and James celebrated their 33rd anniversary quietly, just the two of them riding out to the spot where they had built their first cabin. It still stood, preserved and maintained, a monument to their beginnings. They stood hand in hand, looking at the small structure, and Catherine felt the weight of years and memories settle over her like a comfortable blanket. Do you remember how cold it was that first winter? She asked. I remember thinking the cabin was too small, James replied. But you said it was perfect because it meant we had to stay close to keep warm. Catherine laughed. I was right, though. You usually are. They stood in comfortable silence, and Catherine thought about all the years, all the moments, big and small, that had made up their life together. The hard times and the good times. The struggles and the triumphs. The ordinary days that had turned out to be extraordinary simply because they were together. I love you, she said, the words as true now as they had been 33 years ago. And I love you, James replied, pulling her close. Every day, every moment. You are my heart, Catherine. They stood there as the sun began to set. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. They had created a family, a home, a legacy that would outlast them both. And it had all started with one man's decision to stop when he saw someone in trouble, to help when it would have been easier to ride on. As darkness fell and they rode slowly back to the ranch house where their family waited, Catherine thought about the young woman who had been dragged through the mud, certain she was going to die. That woman could never have imagined this future, this life full of love and purpose and joy. But she had survived, and she had found a man who saw her worth, who chose her and kept choosing her every single day. Thank you, Catherine said suddenly. For what? For cutting me free, for giving me a chance, for loving me. James stopped his horse and reached over to take her hand. Thank you for being brave enough to love me back, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything. Always, Catherine promised, and they rode home together through the falling darkness, toward the lights of their ranch and the family that waited for them, toward the future they continued to build together, one day, one moment, one choice at a time. The years that followed brought their own joys and challenges. The ranch adapted to changing times, incorporating new breeding techniques and modern business practices, while maintaining the values Catherine and James had established. Their grandchildren grew, some staying on the ranch, others seeking their fortunes elsewhere, but all carrying with them the lessons of hard work, integrity, and love that their grandparents embodied. In 1920, Catherine and James celebrated their 38th anniversary and Catherine's 61st birthday. The family threw a grand party, with 3 generations gathered to honor the couple who had started it all. Thomas gave a speech, talking about the legacy his parents had built, not just in land and horses, but in the example of their love and partnership. "My father once told me that the day he found my mother was the day his real life began," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "And my mother said that my father gave her back her life when he cut her free. What they built together, this ranch and this family, is proof that even the worst circumstances can lead to the greatest blessings. They taught us that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every day, a commitment you honor through good times and bad." Catherine wiped away tears as she listened to her oldest son, and James squeezed her hand. They had not talked much about that terrible day to their children, preferring to focus on the positive, but the story was part of their family history, a reminder of where they had come from and what they had overcome. As the party wound down and guests departed, Catherine and James found themselves alone on their porch once more, the familiar place where they had spent so many evenings over the years. 61 years old, Catherine mused. "When did that happen?" "Gradually," James replied with a smile. "Though you're just as beautiful to me now as you were at 23. "Liar," Catherine said affectionately, "but a sweet one." "It is not a lie." James turned to face her, his expression serious. "I look at you and I see everything we have been through together. Every laugh line is a memory of joy. Every gray hair is a year we survived and thrived. You are beautiful because you are you, Catherine, my wife, my partner, my love." "How is it you still make my heart race after all these years?" Catherine wondered. "The same way you still make mine race," James replied. "True love does not fade. It grows." As they sat together in the darkness, Catherine reflected on the truth of his words. Their love had indeed grown over the years, deepening and maturing, becoming something even stronger than the passionate fire of their early days. They knew each other completely now, every strength and weakness, every quirk and habit, and they loved each other not despite these things, but because of them. The 1920s brought prosperity to the ranch and the family. The children were all grown now, building their own lives while remaining close to each other and to their parents. Grace had married a kind man who supported her teaching, and they had given Catherine and James 3 more grandchildren. The twins had both married as well, choosing women who fit seamlessly into the family. Hope, the baby, was courting a young rancher from a neighboring property, and Catherine had no doubt there would be another wedding soon. In 1925, as Catherine and James approached their 43rd anniversary, James fell ill. It was nothing serious, just a persistent cough that would not go away, but it reminded them both that they were not young anymore. The doctor prescribed rest, which James chafed against, but Catherine was firm. "You have spent 40 years working yourself to the bone," she told him. "You can take a few weeks to recover. But the ranch? We'll be fine without you for a little while. Thomas and the boys have everything under control." Catherine sat on the edge of their bed, taking his hand. "Let someone else take care of you for a change." James grumbled but complied, and over the next few weeks, as he recovered his strength, he and Catherine spent hours talking, reminiscing, and simply being together. It was a gift. This enforced slowdown, a chance to appreciate each other without the constant demands of work and family. One afternoon, as James was finally feeling better, Catherine brought out an old tin box she had kept hidden away for years. Inside were mementos from their early days, the torn rope James had cut from her wrists carefully preserved, the marriage certificate Garrett had drawn up, letters they had written to each other during the rare times they had been apart, a pressed flower from Catherine's makeshift wedding bouquet. "I had forgotten about some of these things," James admitted, handling the artifacts carefully. "I could never forget," Catherine said. "These are pieces of our story. I saved them so that someday, when we are old and gray, we could look back and remember." We are old and gray, James pointed out with a smile. Older and grayer, then? Catherine picked up the piece of rope, rubbing her thumb over the frayed end where James had cut through it. This rope nearly killed me, but it also brought me to you. Strange how life works. Not strange, James disagreed. Just the way it was meant to be. James recovered fully from his illness, and life returned to normal, or as normal as it ever was on a busy ranch, but the experience had reminded them both of their mortality, of the preciousness of time. They made a point after that to take more time for themselves, to ride out together without a specific destination, to sit on the porch and talk even when there was work to be done. In 1927, Hope married her rancher, and the wedding was a joyous occasion that brought the entire family together. Catherine watched her youngest daughter dance with her new husband and felt a bittersweet mix of happiness and nostalgia. Her babies were all grown now, all building their own lives and families. What are you thinking? James asked, appearing beside her. That I am blessed, Catherine replied simply. Look at what we created, James. All these people, all these lives, all because you stopped to help a stranger. You were never a stranger, James said. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were going to be important to me. I just did not know how important. The most important, Catherine clarified, linking her arm through his. Always. They danced together at Hope's wedding, moving slowly to the music, and Catherine rested her head on James's shoulder, content. They had built a good life together, she and this man who had saved her. They had faced every challenge together and celebrated every triumph together. They had raised 6 children, seen numerous grandchildren born, and built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As the years of the 1920s gave way to the 1930s, the country faced new challenges with the Great Depression. The ranch weathered the economic storm better than many, diversifying their income sources and relying on the solid reputation James had built over decades. They were able to help neighbors who were struggling, providing work when they could and assistance when it was needed. It was important to both Catherine and James to give back to the community that had supported them for so long. In 1932, they celebrated their 50th anniversary, a milestone that seemed impossible to Catherine. 50 years since that day in Marshall Garrett's office when they had promised to love each other forever. Marshall Garrett himself had passed away the year before, but his memory was honored at the celebration, a reminder of the man who had helped them start their journey. The entire family gathered along with friends from across Arizona and beyond. The ranch had never been so full of people. 3 generations united in celebration of the couple who had started it all. There were speeches and toasts, laughter, and a few tears. Catherine felt overwhelmed by the love in the room, by the realization of just how much they had built together. That night, after everyone had finally gone to bed or departed for home, Catherine and James walked down to the old cabin one more time. They did this often now, drawn to this place that represented their beginning. 50 years, Catherine said wonderingly. How did it go so fast? I do not know, James admitted, but I would not change a single day of it. Not even the hard days, the times when we struggled? Especially not those days, James said firmly. Those days made us who we are. They taught us we could handle anything as long as we faced it together. Catherine turned to face him in the moonlight. At 73, James was still handsome to her, his face weathered and lined, but dear beyond measure. I love you, James Thornton, just as much now as I did 50 years ago, more even. And I love you, Catherine Thornton. You are my heart, my home, my everything. They kissed under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss all those years ago, and Catherine felt the same spark, the same connection that had drawn them together from the start. The next few years passed peacefully. Catherine and James were fully retired now, though they still took an active interest in the ranch and the family. They were beloved grandparents and great-grandparents, always ready with a story or a word of advice or simply a listening ear. The family had grown large and complex, spanning 3 generations, but Catherine and James remained the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. In the spring of 1936, James fell ill again, and this time it was more serious. At 79, he had lived a long and full life, but the doctor was clear that his heart was failing. The family gathered, everyone wanting to spend time with the man who had meant so much to them. Catherine rarely left his side, sitting beside his bed, holding his hand, talking to him about their life together. James drifted in and out of consciousness, but when he was awake, his eyes always found Catherine, and his grip on her hand remained strong. "Do you remember?" he said one afternoon, his voice weak but clear. "The day I found you?" "Every moment of it," Catherine replied, fighting back tears. "Best day of my life," James said, "even though it started with you being dragged through mud." Catherine laughed through her tears. "Only you would remember it that way." "It was the day everything began," James continued. "The day I found my purpose. You, Catherine, you were my purpose. Loving you, building a life with you, that was what I was meant to do." "You did it well," Catherine whispered. "You loved me so well, James." "Did I make you happy?" James asked, and Catherine could hear the vulnerability in his voice. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Catherine assured him. "You gave me everything, James. A home, a family, a love that sustained me through everything. You saved my life that day, but you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live." James smiled, his eyes drifting closed. "Good. That is good." He passed peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by his family, with Catherine holding his hand. She felt the moment his spirit left, felt the absence of him like a physical blow. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath it was gratitude for the life they had shared, the love they had built. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the impact James had made on the community. Catherine stood strong through it all, supported by her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences from people whose lives James had touched. In the days and weeks after, Catherine found herself drawn to the old cabin, to the places where she and James had spent time together. The grief was a constant companion, but so were the memories. 53 years of love, of partnership, of building something beautiful together. She had been blessed beyond measure, and she knew it. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset alone for the first time in 53 years, Thomas came to sit beside her. "Are you all right, Mother?" he asked gently. "I miss him," Catherine admitted. "Every moment. But I am grateful, Thomas. Grateful for every year, every day, every moment I had with your father. He was the love of my life." "He loved you so much," Thomas said. "We all saw it every day. The way he looked at you, the way he always made sure you were happy and cared for. That is the kind of marriage I have tried to build with Sarah. That is the example you and Father gave us." "Your father was a good man," Catherine said. "The best man. He saved me, you know. Not just that first day, but every day after. He saved me from loneliness, from despair, from giving up. He showed me what love could be." Catherine lived for another 5 years after James's death, surrounded by her family and sustained by her memories. She remained sharp and engaged, taking joy in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, watching the ranch continue to thrive under Thomas's leadership. She spoke often of James, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had not known him as long. In the summer of 1941, at the age of 82, Catherine fell ill. The doctor said her heart was simply giving out, worn down by age and grief. Her children gathered around her, and Catherine felt at peace. She had lived a long, full life, far longer than she had ever expected that terrible day in the Arizona mud. On her last day, as consciousness faded in and out, Catherine found herself back in her memories. She saw James as he had been that first day, young and strong, cutting her free and giving her water. She saw him proposing in that little room at the way station, his eyes full of love and hope. She saw him building their cabin, holding their babies, teaching their children, growing old beside her. Every memory was precious, every moment a gift, "I am coming, my love," she whispered with her last breath, and the family gathered around her knew she was talking to James, waiting for her as he had always waited for her. Catherine Thornton was laid to rest beside her husband in the family cemetery on the ranch property, under a sky as wide and blue as the one that had witnessed their first meeting. The headstone was simple but elegant, listing their names, dates, and a single phrase that summed up their entire story: together forever. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own story to the legacy Catherine and James had begun. The old cabin was preserved and eventually turned into a small museum, telling the story of the couple who had built something from nothing, who had turned a moment of violence and terror into a lifetime of love and partnership. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the Arizona mountains, some swear they can still see two figures sitting on the porch of the old cabin, hand in hand, watching the sky turn gold and red, together as they had always been, as they would always be. A love story that began in mud and blood but grew into something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved that even in the hardest of times and the harshest of places, love could not just survive but thrive. Catherine and James Thornton had found each other against all odds, and they had built a legacy that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and enduring love in the wild, untamed heart of the American West.